Hi everybody, Sean Woodland inside the CrossFit Update Studios, being joined now by the General Manager of the CrossFit Games, Justin Berg. Thanks for being here. Unfortunately, we are talking about the same thing that we talked about the last time you were here, and that is performance-enhancing drugs. When last we left you, we had a handful of athletes who tested positive at the Meridian Regional last year, and then we had Ricky Garrard at the Games. Everyone remembers that. How did that affect what has been happening here as far as testing is concerned in 2018?
Sure. I think a lot of people will look back on 2017, and Ricky is the name that they'll focus on. We'd never had a Games podium finisher or even an individual athlete test positive at the CrossFit Games. But really, we learned more from regionals that year than anywhere else. We have always tested the qualifying athletes on the individual side, as well as a bunch of the team athletes that go to the CrossFit Games. And we also try to deploy our tests to the top athletes that are closer to qualification. In the Meridian Regional last year, we saw more positives, and they came from testing earlier in the week instead of just on Championship Sunday, and then also lower down the leaderboard. And we took that same method, and there were more positive tests there, and we had a decision. We can either say, hey, there's more, and so maybe you should stop doing that. And we went the opposite direction, and we said, hey, if this is a problem, we need to test this against all the regionals. And so we applied that same method, testing at registration, testing during the week, not just on Sunday. And we ran that same system across all 9 regional events this year. And that was the big change that I think we took away that resulted in some changes for this year.
So now we fast forward to this year, and we have so far 14 athletes from regionals who tested positive, 5 of whom were going to the CrossFit Games, either on a team or as an individual. When you hear that number 14, what do you think?
It's certainly a larger number than 3 or 4 that we had last year. I think when you look at it, we deployed a lot more tests this year than we ever have. And also, like I said, lower down the leaderboard and earlier in the week. So I think more athletes were being tested that never thought they were going to be tested, even though they showed up at regionals and they were competing to be among the field. Maybe they didn't show up thinking, hey, I'm a professional athlete and I'm trying to get myself to Madison. And maybe they didn't take it as serious as they should. I also think that when you look at all these around the world, there's different pockets where some of these positive tests are coming from, where culturally it's different than here in the United States, where certain performance-enhancing drugs are legal, you can get without prescription in Latin America and in Europe and other places. So I think people have a cultural difference where they say, hey, maybe this is a supplement, but I don't understand. I don't pay a lot of attention to the rule book. Maybe I'm a new athlete, and I never really thought about it. And that's a challenge. What we hope is that the positive tests are from people who are trying to cheat, and we're aggressively going towards those athletes. What we find also is that there's a lot of incidental positives, and we hear it all the time. I mean, it's gut-wrenching to talk to somebody on the phone or through an email, and they go, I was notified of a positive test, in particular on Teams, and they go, I feel terrible. I had no idea. I should have known, but I didn't. And that's just not holding yourself accountable. And I think that the athletes have a duty there. I think we have a role to play in that too, with increasing the education. But this is a pattern that we don't want to see continue. We want the accidental or the I didn't know excuses to get less and less, and then we'll be left with how many people are trying to gain advantage.
So Emily Abbott is the biggest name that came out of those 14. We're going to get into this quite a bit here, but I want to start with the timeline. What happens between the time that she tests positive to when she's notified of her suspension on July 16th?
So she tested positive at the West Regional. We notified her of her positive test on June 18th, I believe. And at that point, within a few hours, she informed us that her attorney would be handling correspondence, and we've dealt exclusively with him through this process. Her attorney requested that we test her B sample and that we also provide a chain of custody document, which took a little while to collect. It's a long, lengthy, detailed thing that goes through the lab and the whole collection procedure. And then we notified her on, with the appeal process concluded on July 10th. So she had about 3 weeks in total to get through all of that. It took us about 5 days, and then we made a ruling on July 15th.
Okay, so she goes to her Instagram profile the day that she was notified, and this was part of the statement that she released. And this is a quote: "Despite her detailed explanation and supporting evidence of how ibutamoren came to be in her sample, The CrossFit Games entirely disregarded Ms. Abbott's explanation and imposed the maximum possible sanction without even granting her a hearing. How was the decision made to not grant her a hearing?
The denial of her hearing was based on a couple factors. First, they provided a very lengthy and very detailed appeal. So it took them a while, obviously, to collect all the information. It included testimonies from several different people. And so it was very complete. We didn't feel like there was anything lacking or any uncertainty that we needed to clarify. The other is that the logistics of trying to schedule an in-person meeting at this late point. If this was 2 or 3 weeks ago, I think it would have been easier, but now here we are, we're a few weeks out from the games. Being able to coordinate herself, myself, Dave, our general counsel, members of Drug Free Sport, and outside agents that we would want to be a part of that. The logistics just aren't practical for where we are in the stage of competition. And I think more importantly, because of the completeness of the document that they supplied to us, I don't think anything was left unsaid. And I think the only thing that could be conveyed at that point was sentiment. And we have a duty as the organizing body here to act on the facts and the probability here. And we didn't feel like there was anything left unsaid. So we felt like she had a very, very complete hearing. I think it was a couple hundred pages of appeal and documents and other precedents that they kind of pleaded that we would look at. And so it took a while, but I think she got a very, very complete understanding of her case.
You said we.
Yeah.
Who were the people who looked at everything and made the decision that, okay, she doesn't get a hearing?
Yeah, it's not a super small group. It's myself, it's the people that head up our drug testing program at Drug Free Sport and the advisors that we have through them. We also use outside third-party professionals who do this for a living, who review therapeutic use exemptions and review arbitration hearings and stuff and have experience with this. We also do our own research. Our general counsel is involved in reviewing the precedent and making sure that we understood kind of the appropriate way to approach this as well. And then ultimately it was our decision, and collectively we arrived, and it was unanimous. I think all of us had the exact same. Upon hearing all the information, there wasn't a difference of opinion there.
What was the crux of her defense?
It boils down to Emily said that she was accidentally contaminated based on a one-time occurrence that happened on Saturday before the championship Sunday at the West Regional. And that was one incident that she had pointed to. We looked at the kind of the body of it, not just the exact details that she supplied, but also our research, the way that people use ibutamoren, the type of dosages and frequency, and the type of advantages that a substance like that conveys, increasing your endogenous production of human growth hormone and insulin-like growth factor. And when you took all of that in, and also the other supplements and prescriptions that she was taking and everything else, it painted a much broader profile than the narrow facts that they were trying to steer us into. So we reviewed that, and the body of evidence, in our opinion, was such that we could not, with a clear conscience, accept that it was likely that this one-time occurrence was the result that caused the positive test.
Let's give Emily the benefit of the doubt here for a moment and say that her explanation is indeed what happened. Assuming that was the case, what, if anything, does that change about the action that CrossFit takes in dealing with this?
I think the first and most important thing that all athletes have to understand, and these are the top athletes, sponsored athletes, people going to the CrossFit Games, and people who are participating on teams, qualifying for regionals, and the 40th spot there, is CrossFit has a policy of strict liability. It is the athlete's responsibility to make sure that their samples do not have a banned substance in that. That means they have to be very judicious about what they put inside their bodies. We don't believe that the case that Emily provided is the likely reason for her contamination. If she had proved that, we still have a policy that says, hey, this is exactly what the we don't reduce sanctions just because there's a possibility that something could happen, or for accidental contamination. The reason why is because that sets the track record for us to say, hey, all you need is a fall guy, and your sentence is cut in half. And I think that means that it's a higher standard that athletes have to play by. But I think it's a reasonable standard, and I think it's a standard that they have to accept. That standard allows the legitimate athletes that are training right and put in all that sacrifice and hard work to make themselves a professional athlete and go to the CrossFit Games. It respects their reputation. And that's what we have, is we have a duty as a nascent sport to make sure we protect the reputation of the athletes and the credibility of the test. And that means we have to have high standards. Having low standards, or having standards that are subject to opinion or speculation or a balance of probability, is a really risky and slippery slope, and we choose not to go there. In this case, it was not as difficult as it may seem, but we have to have a high standard, and we expect our athletes to, and that's the rules that we play by.
On a positive note, we are backfilling the spot. So Andre Ganin was one, and then Emily Abbott is the other, and then those teams are being backfilled as well. That was not done last year. Why did we change that policy?
We learned, and so it's important, the testing, just how we changed the methods and the volume of tests that we ran this year. We also changed procedurally the way that we were prepared for backfills. And so last year, Nathan Bramblett was left out because the case that we were looking at in the Atlantic, it took longer than we expected. And so because we hadn't had a precedent, we didn't have a case that we could go back on with how long these things take and the appeal process to play out. We were left at a point where we were very close to the games, and we felt like it was the right decision with one athlete not to change the field at that point. We'd already been, I think, releasing workouts to a certain extent at that point. This year going into it, as soon as we were notified that some of these athletes had tested positive and that they were beginning the appeal process, we knew it was going to take a longer period of time. So we notified the potential backfill athletes in advance, and we said, hey, you didn't qualify in the qualifying spot, but an athlete ahead of you may be receiving a penalty, so train as if you're going to be competing in Madison. So we gave them the opportunity. We also simultaneously conducted out-of-competition testing for any athlete who was not tested at regionals. That way, we ensure that the field that's showing up in Madison, everybody's tested, and it's not just maybe there was a backfill athlete that was not tested. We got collection agents out all over the world and made sure that we got those samples collected, and they're being analyzed right now. It's a very small number of samples. Most of those athletes did provide a test at the regionals and were clear. But there's a handful that will come back, and we'll get those results expedited in a couple days.
Justin, thank you so much for coming by. Appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about this. If you want to know more about the CrossFit Games drug policy, go to games.crossfit.com. Head to the bottom of the page, and you can click on drug policy to learn more.